Hi there, this is Sydney Kim from Kiro 7 News. Thank you so much for joining me for this Facebook Live. I'm joined by Dr. Jeff Duchin from the Seattle-King County Public Health to talk to us about acute flaccid myelitis, also known as AFM. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
So this is a very perplexing illness. It's really mysterious in a lot of ways. Talk to us about what we know about AFM and this cluster that we're seeing here in Washington State.
Sure. You're right. AFM is a little bit unusual. It's a disease that's known to be linked to certain viruses. So we know that certain enteroviruses, adenoviruses, some of the herpesvirus family, Coxsackie virus, can cause this illness. But it's very rare. Globally, it's thought to be a 1 in a million type of thing. But since 2014 in the U.S., there have been clusters of children primarily who developed this disease. And it's not exactly clear now what is causing it. It's probably a virus, but it's not known with certainty which virus it might be. So there's a lot of investigation that's been in progress both in the states that have reported these clusters, Colorado, California, Arizona, and now we're having a small cluster here in Washington State with 9 children who have had symptoms that appear to be AFM, but aren't really confirmed yet to be definitely that syndrome. And if so, we'll be looking very, very hard at these cases to see if we can figure anything out that will help us understand the cause.
So as Dr. Duchin said, 9 cases of suspected AFM here in Washington State. I believe 2 of those cases have been confirmed to be AFM. Over the weekend, a 6-year-old boy from Bellingham died. His name was Daniel Ramirez. He's not one of the confirmed cases, but of course that's something that health officials are now investigating. And it's heartbreaking. His parents spoke with our Maria Guerrero yesterday, and they talked about how suddenly this hit. I believe he was admitted to Seattle Children's Hospital October 15th. He had some of those symptoms that people associate with it. I believe he had drooling, slurred speech, pain in his leg, and incontinence. His parents didn't know what it was. They initially thought it was a stomach ache. Eventually, this virus moved to his brain. And 2 weeks later, he's now dead. And now his parents are they're in grief and just searching for answers. Here's what they told Maria yesterday.
I feel like it's a nightmare. I feel like I'm in a nightmare and I'm trying to wake up.
It's been pretty rough.
I kissed him on his forehead and I said, I'll see you later, buddy. I'll see you again. I want to see answers. And I imagine him getting married and having kids and becoming something great. But I guess it didn't turn out that way.
I'm heartbroken hearing that mother and that father speak. And it just happened so quickly. I mean, in 2 weeks, this little boy was sick and gone. How common is this?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. It's heartbreaking. I hate to see anything like that. As a parent, as a public health person, it's a tragedy. The only thing that I can say that's remotely positive about that situation is that's not typical for AFM.
Okay.
And again, we don't know that that is what this child had. Certainly had some of the symptoms that are
Sure.
consistent, but we're not sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
Among the AFM cases that are reported, most of them have weakness of an arm, a leg, maybe more than one part of the extremity. Some have the facial weakness that you describe, but very few go on to have that brain involvement and that sort of severe outcome that poor child had. So typically what we see with AFM is child complaining of inability to move an arm, move a leg, maybe some facial muscle weakness, difficulty speaking or swallowing. Sometimes, quite frequently actually, it is preceded by signs of a viral illness like fever, cough, sometimes diarrhea in the child or in the family, which is one of the reasons why people suspect that there's a virus that's related to this syndrome. But most children do not develop that severity of illness.
If you're just joining us right now, I'm with Dr. Jeffrey Duchin from Seattle-King County Public Health to talk to us about acute flaccid myelitis, AFM, this mystery illness that is suspected of sickening some kids here in Washington State, 9 kids so far. Talk to us a little bit about how AFM is confirmed. What's the testing that has to be done to find out in fact, that these kids are sickened with AFM? And how do you investigate this in Daniel's case, a child who's already dead? How do you find this in the autopsy?
Right. So as you can imagine, weakness is a pretty nonspecific symptom. AFM is diagnosed by a combination of things. So the clinical presentation or the weakness, the difficulty speaking, a physical exam by a trained physician is important. There are also tests that can be done on blood and lumbar puncture or spinal fluid that can suggest what the cause might be. Sometimes an explanation is found. And a very, very important, essential piece of the puzzle in diagnosing AFM is something called an MRI. It's an imaging test or a scan that shows the spinal cord and the brain very well. And in particular, there's some findings on the MRI that are very specific for the AFM syndrome that affect those nerves that allow the muscles to move.
Okay. The kids here in Washington range in age from 3 to 14 years old. I've heard the median age is 7. Why are kids in this specific age group most vulnerable?
Yeah, and that's been pretty typical across the country in these clusters that have developed. There's a spread of different ages, some younger than 7, ranging up to the teens, early 20s. But that's the average is around 7 to 9 years old in most of the reports. These are ages where children are very susceptible to viral infections. As you know, young kids get a lot of virus infections. Their immune systems are just learning. They're being exposed to new viruses. They're developing immunity with each infection. So it's possible that these children are just experiencing an infection with a new virus for the first time, and it's causing a more severe disease than it typically causes in someone who may have been related with either the same or a similar virus. It's quite possible that AFM really is a very uncommon manifestation or an uncommon effect of a very common virus that in most people is just a cold or a diarrheal disease that gets better by itself. But there may be a small subset of the population that for some reason, which is not understood, is more susceptible to this neurological complication of what's ordinarily a pretty unremarkable and not serious infection.
It's just strange that we're starting to see an uptick because last year in Washington State, no cases of AFM. There were 2 in 2014, and just this year alone, we're seeing 9. And I believe these symptoms all reported in the month of October?
Correct that they all reported in the month of October, but I'm not quite sure yet that all 9 are really going to be eventually established as real cases or not. But it may be 9, and we can't say if we're going to see more or not. It's possible additional cases will be reported. There's clearly a seasonality to this disease. So across the U.S., it comes at a certain time of year. It's usually a cluster of cases, and then it's gone again. And so, again, that's one of the other things that sort of suggests to us that it may be something that's synchronized with the activity of a certain virus in the community, because as you know, we have seasons to our viruses.
Sure.
End of summer, early fall, we have new viruses moving in frequently, the enterovirus family and others, adenovirus, some of the viruses that cause colds and flu-like illnesses. So that's one of the other indirect pieces of evidence that suggests this might be due to a virus that's coming into a community, starts infecting a lot of people. Most of them don't have a problem. A small number, for some reason, get a complication, in this case, possibly AFM.
Okay, I do want to take a moment to address some of the questions that we have here on our Facebook Live, and it looks like a lot of people are really concerned about this, as am I. One of the viruses that you mentioned earlier was the Coxsackie virus, which is hand, foot, and mouth disease, and that's something that my daughter got just a couple of weeks ago. So when you immediately said Coxsackie, I thought of my little girl.
Right.
She's 16 months old.
Right. So this is a really important point that the AFM, what we know about AFM is that it's a very rare or unusual complication of certain viruses. So it's already known that in a very, very minuscule number of people who get Coxsackie, something like AFM can develop. And it's known that for adenovirus, similar, for certain enteroviruses. Now, poliovirus is a type of enterovirus that used to be common in the U.S. Before we had polio vaccine, tens of thousands of kids would develop a syndrome, poliovirus syndrome, that was just like this disease that we're seeing now. With the onset of vaccination, that's disappeared, right? It's prevalent in certain parts of the world. So if you're a traveler, you really need to double check before you travel that you're up to date. All our kids get vaccinated now, and they're protected against polio. This is not polio. But there are related viruses, other enteroviruses that can do this. Enterovirus 71 is a cause of infections that can infect not only the brain, but also the spinal cord and cause a syndrome like this with weakness of the muscles. So Coxsackie, very, very, very uncommon to have this complication, but it can happen in 1 in a million type thing.
We've got somebody, Christy, who says flu shots, I believe, are the problem. And that is a common comment I've seen when we initially broke news about this cluster here in Washington State of suspected AFM. A lot of people wanted to know whether these kids had gotten the flu shot and whether they'd been vaccinated. And there was some concern that it could be vaccinations or flu shots that are, in fact, causing kids to become sick with this neurological illness. Yeah.
So I can tell you our King County cases, they didn't have flu shots. Flu shots are not associated with this. No vaccines have been associated with this syndrome. I will tell you that people may be concerned because back in 1976, there was a swine flu vaccine that about 1 in 100,000 excess incidents of a different disease that affected the nerves called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Not since then, so our flu vaccines since then haven't had that issue, but it's not this disease, and there's no evidence linking any vaccine to this disease. You know, again, these are kids of all different ages. They're not getting the same vaccines. They're at different stages of life. You know, we have vaccines going on all year round. This is a seasonal phenomenon that occurs just at a certain time of year in certain communities. You know, if this was linked to vaccines, we'd expect to see it across the country on an ongoing basis because we're regularly vaccinating our kids every day. And that's not what's happening here.
Because there are still so many more questions that have to be answered about AFM, as a health official, how worried are you that we're talking about 9 suspected cases here in Washington State alone, 50 so far this year across the nation, and you're still looking for answers, and we still have really no conclusive answers as to cause or prevention?
Well, I would say it's very frustrating anytime we're faced with a serious illness and we really don't know what's causing it. I'm reassured by the fact that in other communities where this disease has occurred, it's passed. It's not something that continues to occur and continues to build and build. So it's relatively well-defined in time. There's a cluster and then it goes away. And if indeed it is a virus, it may be reassuring that as people become more exposed to it, the risk of getting a severe complication from it may be lower. So if, for example, this is due to a virus that's changed or newly introduced, people are now becoming exposed, they're susceptible to the severe side effect. As they develop immunity in the population from the infection, fewer people will be expected to have it. We haven't seen large-scale outbreaks anywhere in the world, so that's very reassuring. But on the other hand, what you say is exactly right. We want to get to the bottom of this. We'd like to know what causes it. We'd like to know how to prevent it if possible, and we'd like to be able to give people an explanation. It's quite likely that many of the cases of AFM that we're seeing are not all the same. So although many of them may be linked because of the fact they're clustering in time and they may be related to the exposure to a certain virus, there are probably other cases in there that are totally unrelated, either coincidental or not even the same cause at all. That's typical when you have a new disease and you don't have a specific way to test for it, definitively.
Hey, so Michelle says she's looking at her phone instead of looking at him. Michelle, I'm listening to what Dr. Duchin is saying, but what I'm also doing is monitoring your questions and comments here on Facebook Live, because we have them here and you're watching this live. So this is a great opportunity for you to comment and ask your questions. So I get this comment a lot from people who may be joining the stream for the first time and aren't familiar with how we conduct it. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm not being rude. I'm listening to him, but I'm asking, I'm trying to monitor your questions so that I can ask Dr. Duchin. So if you have anything you would like to ask him at all, please go ahead and leave a comment here so that he can hopefully answer these questions for her. Diane, once again, is saying it's like he's talking to her and she isn't paying attention. So not being rude here, guys. I'm just trying to make this stream as efficient as possible. Okay, so we talked about how we think that this may be caused from certain viral infections. So I want to address what Sarah's saying because, you know, some people may be joining the stream right now. She wants to know, is it contagious? I mean, how contagious would you say AFM is?
I would say AFM is not contagious. And that's because we don't see this weakness, the paralysis, spreading from person to person at all. And it's been observed in multiple communities around the U.S. It's possible that it's acquired by a virus, a cold virus, like I said, something like that, that can be spread from person to person. But again, it's a very rare complication, most likely, if that's the case, of that virus. So, for example, if we have a common virus in the community and it rarely causes this side effect, people may be spreading that virus from one person to person, but very few people are going to end up with this rare side effect. And the fact that you have the complication doesn't make it more likely that you're going to spread the complication to someone else. You'll just spread the virus, and their risk of getting that complication is extremely low. So we don't see it. The bottom line is we don't see the AFM spreading from person to person.
Okay. Is there a chance that the people who do get this, what can be a common viral infection, but end up coming down with AFM, is there a chance that they've had some sort of, or they had some sort of underlying health condition that would allow AFM to manifest?
Well, there's nothing obvious that's jumping out at either the researchers that have looked at the couple of hundred cases that have occurred since 2014 or the current cases. However, it's possible, I think many of the reasons why people get infected with, well, not infected with, get certain diseases or have certain manifestations of infections is related to our own individual genetic makeup. So it is possible that people who share something in the genetic sense are more susceptible to getting this severe complication, but that's really not known. But with many infections, you know, your likelihood of getting a serious outcome or getting infected at all is a combination of both the virus or the bacteria and your own genetic makeup, how your immune system works.
Okay. Dr. Duchin, I hate to cut you short, but we've got to actually end this Facebook Live because there's apparently some other breaking news that our newsroom has to get to. Thank you for being here with us to answer these questions about AFM, and thank you for joining us for this Facebook Live.